Good morning again. My name is Eric Robertson. I'm the Global Head of Research and Chief Strategist for Standard Chartered, and it's an enormous privilege on my part to welcome all of you here in the room and globally to what I think is going to be a really powerful and impactful event. I'm sure all of you share my sentiments in terms of the privilege that I felt hearing directly from His Excellency about some of the progress that we're seeing in the region, the accomplishments over the last couple of years, and the way forward. And joining me today is a group of people that I think are especially well placed to talk about some of the specific avenues of progress that we are seeing in the region. We heard a lot already today about economic progress, diversification, some of the strategies that are being put in place to take Dubai, the Emirates, and in fact the GCC into the new world. And a lot of that discussion was around economic planning, the partnerships between the public sector and the private sector. And what I want to do today with this panel and with this group of experts is talk a little bit more specifically about the sustainability initiative. In other words, the diversification theme as it applies to some of the infrastructure development that we're seeing here in the region, and what that means from an environmental point of view and an infrastructure point of view. We'll talk about things like green hydrogen, smart cities, and some of the other new projects and developments that this group of people are involved in. Just before we get on to the content and the discussion, just a couple of housekeeping items. Obviously, this is a live event and will be recorded. Please do use your iPad. Try and log questions if you have them. And I will try and address them during the conversation, but rest assured, if you have questions that are not addressed, we will find a way to get them answered by the experts. Before moving on, I want to introduce everybody on stage here with me. Clive Turton, here to my right, Chief Investment Officer for Aqua Power. Sarah Kiriluk from ENGIE, the Head of Investments and Financial Advisory for Middle East, Africa, and India. Mohammed Hamra Krua, partner at Clifford Chance Law Firm, representing, I think, some important insights for all of us today into some of the obstacles, challenges, and opportunities from the legal framework point of view. And last but certainly not least, Ali Tahir Jaffrey, my colleague and friend here in Dubai, representing our project and export finance business at Standard Chartered. So with those introductions out of the way, I want to get straight into a key topic of conversation, green hydrogen, a topic that I know is near and dear to all of your hearts. But Clive, let's start with you. Aqua is involved in the implementation of Saudi Arabia's largest green hydrogen project, if I'm getting that correct.
The world's largest green hydrogen project.
Talk to us about that opportunity and maybe throw in some of the challenges that you're facing as well.
Sure, I'd love to. Straight into I think the most interesting topic in the energy transition today is the beginnings of green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is a topic that gets a lot of volume in terms of speaking, but we are at the beginning of the real construction. So you mentioned, yeah, so we are under construction of what's called the NEOM Green Hydrogen Project. It is the world's largest green hydrogen project in construction. It's at NEOM in Saudi Arabia, and it's a 4.2 gigawatt wind and solar facility, 2 gigawatts of electrolyzers that will produce 1.25 million tons of green ammonia per year. This is our first step into what we see as a very, very large industry. I mean, today there is a market for hydrogen. I mean, today there is a global market for hydrogen of around 80 million tons a year. But most analysts predict that market grows to 200 million tons by 2030, 500 million tons by 2050. And a large proportion of that will be green. Today it's only grey, except for some very small projects. And this is a big turnaround in the energy industry. This enables us to look at renewable energy as a source for transport, for chemical processes, for steel manufacture, for all different areas where so far electricity hasn't penetrated. And I think this region, what is interesting, is particularly well suited to capitalize on the opportunity for green hydrogen. I mean, to develop a green hydrogen project, you need cheap, abundant, renewable energy. You need attractive financing, and you need a source to market. And if you think about this area, we have the cheapest solar tariffs in the world in this region. We have very good financial markets, yourselves included, very supportive to our projects. And we have access to Europe, which will be one of the key markets for green hydrogen. So it's a fascinating opportunity. It's a fascinating time. And I think we are seeing the beginning of what will be an enormous industry starting here.
Thank you, Clive. Sarah, in December, ENGIE and Masdar signed a strategic alliance agreement with the focus being on a green hydrogen hub based here in the Emirates. Would you talk us through that? Talk us through your plans there and maybe some of the longer term thinking that you guys are doing around this key topic.
Yeah, sure. So can you hear me? Yeah. So maybe I'll start by giving an overview of what ENGIE's targets are with respect to green H2. Of course, green H2 is very much high on the agenda for us as well. We have actually internally set up a business unit that was dedicated to H2 already back in 2015. Now H2 is integrated into the thermal vertical that we have. And we have strong ambitions in H2. So we have a target to develop green hydrogen by 4 gigawatts between now and 2030. Okay, compared to the numbers that are floating around, in particular for NEOM, this may sound small, but today the project that we are seeing, there are still pilot projects of up to 10 megawatts. So 4 gigawatts is actually a big number. And today we have a number of concrete opportunities in the region here, as well as in Africa, in Australia, in Europe as well. The projects we're talking about range between 100 to 200 megawatts by 2025. And of course, there is this one, which is very important to us here in the UAE. We have announced end of last year an MOU with Masdar to develop up to 2 gigawatts of green H2 production in the region, but it can go beyond that as well. We're talking about 5 billion of investments, and there is a very concrete opportunity which will form part of that partnership, which is a project for Fertiglobe. So we are talking about producing green H2 that will feed into the ammonia plant of Fertiglobe to ultimately produce green ammonium. Part of it will be used locally, part of it will be exported, can be to Europe, can be to Asia. And so today we are very much working on that one. Because the target for that one is to have the assets ready by 2025. So it's almost tomorrow.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you both. I think we could probably spend the whole session just on green hydrogen alone, but I know for our audience, there's a number of other topics that we'd like to get into. Sarah, I want to keep the spotlight on you for a second and talk about some of the other green and renewable infrastructure development projects that we should all be thinking about. I know ENGIE is diversifying, for example, into smart cities, social infrastructure. We heard His Excellency say repeatedly the importance of public-private partnerships, and I know that's a key focus for you as well. Talk us through some of those initiatives and diversification plans.
Mm-hmm. So ENGIE has been active in the region for the past 2 decades, and we've been developing along with the governments, the large IWPPs, IPPs, and now more recently also IWPs. And we'll continue to do that, of course. What people maybe don't know so much about ENGIE is that we also have one vertical within the group that is about energy services. So we have been also active in this field for the past 2 decades in the region itself. And maybe there's a slight shift in strategy to the extent that so far what we have been doing was mainly what we call asset light, so activities without much capex, but now we're also going into more asset-based types of activities. I can give a few examples. So earlier this year, we have participated to a tender for street lighting in the UAE. So we're talking about replacing 130,000 of lighting points by more efficient LED. So that's one. We're also looking into healthcare sector, hospitals. And I would say the common point to all these projects is around energy efficiency. So it has to have an energy efficiency angle to it for us to be interested. If I give a few other examples of these types of projects, we're also active in district cooling, decentralized district cooling through Tabrid. We have a stake in Tabrid that we acquired in 2017. So very much a focus for us also. And then we're doing a few smaller projects for corporates to help them on their way to the decarbonization targets that they've set themselves. I can name a couple of them as well. So we have, for example, Fonadec, which is a leading food agriculture and food processing company in KSA. We have developed a 30 megawatt on-site solar facility. We've also recently closed a 10 megawatt waste heat recovery facility for a global cement company here in the UAE. So we're very much helping the corporate clients as well as the governments on their path to decarbonization.
That's amazing. There's clearly a wealth of opportunities for people to get involved in as well. Mohammed, I wanted to bring you into the conversation and offer your perspective. I mean, we've heard on a number of occasions already today about this transformation that we're seeing in the region, the speed of the transformation, but equally the importance of governance. And I wondered if you could offer some insights into both the opportunities and the challenges for people who are just getting involved in the space and just getting up to speed.
Sure. Thank you. I mean, earlier in the initial session, His Excellency Hilal Saeed Al-Marri referred to the importance of investment in both hard and soft assets. And I thought that really rang quite an important point because of the importance of the regulatory framework as an important soft asset underlying a lot of the feasibility of the project that were mentioned earlier in the discussion. I mean, and really the focus on regulatory framework as an enabler really plays on a number of levels. I would say the first, and looking back just at the last 18 months, the focus on the regulatory framework for build-up of human capital. There were a number of reforms that were announced with a golden visa program, long-term residency program in the UAE as well as elsewhere in the region. So across the GCC, there is a big focus on the importance to retain, attract, and make people build routes so that these projects, no matter which sector, and to enable the diversification can actually be enabled. So that's kind of one area. You could also see it in the regulatory approach to COVID and how it was managed. The fact that Dubai and has been such an attractive pole for people who couldn't do business and work in other metropolis, could actually come here and set up business, is a testimony to the importance of regulatory regulation as an investment to be able to build the human capital. The second area is actually the more physical assets, and there, the focus we've seen on the public-private partnership, and looking just for the last 30 years, starting with the more traditional utilities, inventing pretty much the IWPPs with Abu Dhabi projects but a number of years back, and then really disseminating across the region, and then spawning into new areas, the focus on social infrastructure, transport, as areas where that model is adapted. That's supported by an enabling framework that focuses on improving bankability. So regulatory revisiting insolvency law, revisiting companies law, looking regularly at reforming how securities taken, how courts operate. All these are really the underlay to be able to enable those performing financial markets, which are so important for these projects. And then the third one is really the financial assets, is the ability to have in the region financial institutions that can operate and deliver on this promise of funding this diversification and these projects, and this really requires a strong regulatory backbone, good regulators that are not stifling innovation, but also ensuring that financial institutions are robust, well capitalized, and at the same time can branch into fintech and innovation. So these are the balance that needs to be stricken by these regulations. So these are kind of some of the areas I think we could talk about more.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Ali, in your role at Standard Chartered, you're obviously in the privileged position of working with a number of our guests on stage and in the audience as a financing partner, as an advisory partner. Talk us through what you are seeing currently as some of the best opportunities, perhaps how the opportunity set has changed over the last couple of years with COVID and now some of the supply chain issues that we're seeing.
Thanks, Eric. Look, first of all, let me set the stage. Now, as far as infrastructure financing is concerned, the good thing about that is that you need to look beyond what is there immediately. So you need to look at more than 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And everybody who's involved in this space, be it the governments, the developers, or the lenders, they all realize that, they all understand that. So when we talk about the challenges in terms of supply chain and COVID, et cetera, there are challenges, of course, because there were demand challenges. Now there are supply chain challenges, but everybody needs to plan for years in advance. These projects do take time to set up. And that's why whenever the governments or the developers or the lenders look at these projects, they look at a very long-term horizon. And luckily in this region, specifically in this region, that is really well understood by the governments. The pipeline of projects has remained really, really strong through the COVID crisis. And now after it, the developers, international developers like NG and others, they realize that this is the region where most of the opportunities are coming. So they have not shied away. They continue to invest. They don't want to be out of the game, as I'd say. And the lenders who have been in the space for a long period of time, like Standard Chartered Bank, very active in project finance, we also realize that this is the space that we need to stay in to help the communities, to help the infrastructure funding. So that is something which is extremely well understood. And that's why, while these challenges might be, they might seem really challenging at any point of time, when we look at a long-term horizon, we know that infrastructure is required to create jobs and to create opportunities in this region. Now, as far as how things have moved over the past few years, liquidity remains strong. I mean, obviously, we all know liquidity across the globe has remained strong, but particularly in this region, there's been a lot of inflow of liquidity coming in from west and east, both alike. And with COVID, what we saw was a slight shift from a lending perspective. We saw a slight shift from marginal credits to stronger credits. So effectively, lenders sort of staying away from the marginal level business houses and focusing more on high quality government-backed or government-supported financings. And that has actually worked really well for the infrastructure space, because the infrastructure space here is all about involvement from the government and public-private partnership. So that has actually worked out quite well. Now, going forward, obviously, interest rates rising, liquidity is being pulled by the central banks. Well, it is fortunately, again, not a big problem here, because while the rest of the world faces the headwinds from the rising commodity prices, we actually see tailwinds here from the rise in oil prices, increase in liquidity. And while the base interest rates are rising, there is always going to be a lot of liquidity available to support these projects.
Thanks, Ali. That's super helpful. Clive, you and I have spoken offline a few times about some of the interesting projects that are happening in Saudi Arabia, whether it's the gigacities and some of the tourism focused projects. I wondered if you could tell the audience a little bit about ACWA's role in those projects and where you see the line of progression.
Yeah, sure. I'm trying to think of which of the things that we talked about offline I should or shouldn't say. No, but it's, I mean, ACWA Power, as everyone knows, is a Saudi-based company. We're listed in Saudi Arabia, and we are a big part of the green initiative there towards 2030. And it is quite a fascinating part of the world at the moment, because the amount of activity that we are driving in terms of energy transition is enormous. We're involved in some of the largest PV projects, as I think has been publicized. But yes, we're also, I mean, particularly interesting is the Red Sea project, where there are 16 hotels that are being developed in this area on the Red Sea, a separate development, all off-grid, completely managed and powered by Aqua Power, where we'll have the world's largest battery, a 1.3 gigawatt battery associated with solar power. So we'll be supplying 100% renewable energy to this development, which will be luxury hotels. I hope that I can afford to stay there. It looks spectacular. I mean, and that in addition to that, you see what's happening in NEOM. We mentioned earlier about the green hydrogen project, which is associated with NEOM, but NEOM itself is an extremely ambitious, also very much focused on renewable energy project. And there's only a long pipeline to go. I mean, there are gigawatts, I think 70 gigawatts of renewable projects that have been slated over the next many years, some of which we developed by Aqua Power and PIF together, and some of which will be tendered. But yeah, it's a fascinating time. And I kind of wanted to pick up a little bit what was said earlier about supply chain. I don't know if you're going to cover this again later, but it's a very interesting time in the renewable energy space, not just in Saudi Arabia, but worldwide, because you have increasing interest in building wind, building solar, building renewable sources, partly because of what is happening globally. A lot of countries are realizing that energy independence is something that they should really be taking seriously. And one of the best ways to establish energy independence is to use the resources of the country. And that's the wind and the sun in a lot of cases, exacerbated by what the global events, which are also in turn making it more difficult, because the challenges on supply chain are also rising with the rising demand. So we are in a quirky position right now where we have more and more activity, but the challenges are also rising. So I think it's going to be interesting, I think, over the next couple of years to see how everything settles out. I don't think there's any change in where we go. I think the direction is very clear. There's no U-turn on renewable energy, but the current challenges make it very interesting. Sorry, I got completely off topic of the question, but I really wanted to comment on the point about supply chain, because we see it, I mean, we saw it as a challenge during COVID. As COVID started to ease, I think everyone would agree, we started to think, okay, this is going away, and now the ridiculous war in Ukraine has suddenly recreated all the problems, but also recreated the impetus to drive towards sustainable energy.
I want to continue with that theme with all of you. I promised myself today that you wouldn't hear very much from me, and I'm going to stick with that promise, because these are the ones you want to hear from. But I do want to stir the pot a little bit. I just want to make this a little bit interesting. One of the questions that I'm asked repeatedly in my role in research for the bank by clients is, you know, governments around the world, investors around the world, depleted an enormous amount of their financial resources, getting their businesses and their economies through the COVID crisis. And as you say correctly, you know, we got through COVID, or largely got through COVID, and we started to look to the blue skies again. And then we have this military conflict, which has derailed us. And many governments, many financial institutions are finding that they've actually depleted all of their financial resources, and we still need them. And so the question is, will a number of these projects, which are so important in our regions, our countries, to our businesses, will they be postponed? Will they be extended? Will they be canceled? Will there be examples where really critical projects will be canceled because governments will make the choice that, well, I need to feed my people rather than focusing on building infrastructure? And, you know, I'd like each of you to sort of take a turn on this, because this really gets to the heart of risk management and some of the challenges that we're facing now today. I'll just go one at a time. Ali, you know, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, I've been here in the region for 18, 19 years now, and probably this is the third crisis that I'm going through. And what I've seen is that the governments here are really forward-looking. And what happens is, whenever they're faced with a crisis, they push these projects through. Yes, you're right. Some of the marginal projects, as we said, some of the projects that can be postponed will be postponed. But some of the real strategic initiatives, like Vision 2030 in Saudi, renewables here, I don't think there is any intention from the authorities or the developers, or even from a liquidity side perspective, to hold them back or put them on a coal burner. What we see is that, yes, there are challenges on the supply chain. Projects that we finance over the last couple of years, there is some pain around those projects. Obviously, suppliers not fulfilling their obligations, et cetera, et cetera. But then, everybody is looking ahead, and governments are willing to share the pain to an extent with the developers on some of those projects. And they just want to sort of go full throttle, get all their critical projects done and financed as per their original plan. Even more so, I think what it does is, as I think Clive mentioned, it kind of gives that impetus to the local policymakers to diversify, to become more self-reliant on some of the aspects. I wouldn't be surprised if going forward there are projects which, for example, some of these supply chain issues that all of that supply chain is brought. There are projects to bring the entire supply chain in-house within the countries. So in my opinion, that actually kind of gives that impetus to the region. And as I said, good thing about the region is there are tailwinds because of the oil prices, which kind of just helps everything here, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Mohammed?
Yeah, and I would just echo the fact that the region probably, when you look at a global perspective, probably is an exception that, yes, there is a windfall for the region, restoring fiscal margins for investment, for capital deployment compared to elsewhere in the region. So I think that actually is a bit of a differentiator comparing to coming out from a very tough period when oil prices went through the floor literally, and that really allows for the foreseeable future a much more solid fiscal position. Of course, UAE and Saudi are kind of the locomotives for investment in PPP and some of these mega projects, but even beyond, some of the other GCC markets are seeing restoration of these fiscal margins. So I think it's quite important to recognize that as an additional incentive for these investments. The second thing is that there is a clear view on the decarbonization agenda, which is already pushing the look at green hydrogen, beyond the NEOM project. Just across the region, there is, in every interaction we have with client discussion, decarbonization is really at the heart of these discussions. Even when looking at talking to national oil companies, looking at carbon.
Yep, I can hear you. Hey.
An industry which is on a ticking time. I think that will be the balance for the region, which will be the supplier of oil of last resort, to be able to continue to attract and retain the financing for the infrastructure in order to supply the world, while you're having the green hydrogen, which is turning away suppliers, advisors, as well as lenders, which are all saying, well, I'm going to stop doing oil and gas financing.
Fantastic. Thank you. Sarah?
Well, I can only concur to what has been said. I think we have gone through crisis in the past. It's true that the current one is a bit peculiar, but I'm sure that it's only a matter of time till things go back to normal. How long will it take? I'm not too sure. And it's true that the current context is making things very difficult to close and even to bid for new projects. And I think everyone will need to make an effort, be it on the developer side, on the government side, on the bank side, but in the end we'll get there. And the past 2 decades have shown that there was a strong willingness to build the required infrastructures here in the region. And clearly the IPP/PPP type of model has proved to be successful, and I don't think that the current context will put a stop to that. So I'm very confident, like Ali, that it's only a matter of time, and we need to look forward and try to to go through the storm that we see today.
Clive, do you want to share your thoughts? You and I have talked about some of these challenges already.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking while the other panelists were talking, I mean, I agree with everything that was said. I mean, I think the overall demand for renewable energy development is still super strong. And I don't see the challenge in the capital. I don't see the challenge in raising finance for new projects. I think there's still an enormous amount of liquidity available for those kinds of projects. So I don't see it as a financial issue. There is an issue, for sure, and it's more, to my mind, that the structure of the traditional IPP model is that the off-taker passes 100% of the risk to the developer, who then passes the risk to the contractors down the line. That's fine when you have certainty as to what the risks are. The challenge today is that movements in commodity prices, movements in supply chain, mean that there is uncertainty around how big the risks are on steel prices, for example, or any other factor that comes into the project. So the way that risk gets dealt with, uncertainty gets dealt with when pricing risk is increased. If you want someone to take a risk on something that's much more difficult to predict, their costs go up. So how does that manifest itself in the industry is I think, Ali, you hit on it. You see a bit of a slowdown. It's not possible to do exactly what we did 3 years ago today. So there will be an impact. But as Sarah said, the direction is going in only one way. There is still a lot of demand. We know the industry works, the model works. It will right itself. But yeah, we are in a period of a little bit of flux and uncertainty today, and hopefully it only lasts 6 months. Maybe it lasts a bit longer, but yeah, I think that's the situation.
One of the questions that I've been thinking a lot about over the last year, especially since I arrived in the region, is I remember a personal experience that I had here in the GCC about 10 years ago. And I was speaking with a government official, and I said, what do you see as the biggest challenge in terms of attracting international interest to the projects that you're working on? And he said something, quite fascinating, which is, look, Eric, the biggest issue we face is when people come to the region, they typically come to the region because they want to raise capital here and take that capital to other places around the world, right? They want the sovereign wealth funds and the sources of liquidity that are here to help fund their own projects elsewhere. And what we're trying to do is reverse that. We want people to come here, see the opportunities here, and bring their capital and expertise. And so I just wondered, Ali, maybe you could start us off, but what are you seeing in terms of international interest that's not just the local experts?
You look, excuse me. So look, we've had a lot of interest from power and water developers over the years anyway in the region. I mean, one of the panelists mentioned that we've had this IPP, IWP model, which has worked out really well over the years, and we've seen governments happy to sort of give support to that model, lenders happy to lend to that model, and a lot of international developers. I mean, I think both Clive and Sarah would agree it's a very, very competitive space. I mean, it's been this way for the last, 20 years. Now the challenge obviously is because the region wants to diversify into other sort of newer technologies, newer industries, newer sectors, and they want private developers to come and invest into those sectors as well. And we are seeing of late that the developers, international developers or funds are actually obliging. I mean, we are seeing the likes of BlackRock, for example, coming into massive projects with ADNOC, with Aramco in the region, coming in as financial investors. We're looking at other investors and other developers looking very keenly on these newer sort of sectors in the region. I think the key is to develop and I think Mohammed will probably answer that question better than me. The key is to develop a proper framework for all of these sectors and provide the right level of support to each of these sectors. And the opportunities are here. At the sake of repeating myself, I think this region presents probably the most amount of opportunities right now, based on what is happening in the market. But yes, I mean, there needs to be the right level of support and the right kind of regulatory and legal framework that needs to be put in place.
That's a perfect segue for you, Mohammed.
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you, Ali. The point really, I think, which you touched upon is actually we are seeing these flows in the context of not necessarily greenfield projects.
Yeah.
You are seeing private equity money, you're saying funds trying to get deployed in the monetization of oil and gas infrastructure. You mentioned the BlackRock transaction with ADNOC. You had the EIG transaction in the oil infrastructure, the oil pipeline with Aramco, followed most recently with the gas network by Aramco. Again, record levels of interest. Talking tens of billions of dollars. Again, that frees up cash for NOCs to redeploy in decarbonization path, in investments to diversify the mix of the energies that they are looking at, and other NOCs in the region are looking at similar stories. We're seeing the same amount of interest in other efficiency drive, for example, district cooling, waste, not the sexiest kind of assets, but these are in these current periods where you are having oil prices which are at record levels. The opportunity cost is such that actually it's very important to make sure that the focus on efficiency is there. So you're seeing similar monetization initiatives by other NOCs in the region for power supply, water supply, and bringing in private partners and financing from abroad. So I think that's really supported by, one, the strengths of the credit. I think there's probably a distinction to make between those projects which benefit from the support and maybe the weaker spot, which is more CNI projects. You mentioned the NADEC project, but I think it's probably one of very few that was able to get done. And you probably see these are more a stretch that we need to cross to get lenders as well as equity investors comfortable with that risk. So really that's really the two stories, but we're seeing those flows, and hopefully there'll be much more of that.
Clive, your thoughts on the attraction for the international partners that you guys may have?
Yes, there's quite enough competition. Yes. I mean, the projects here are well structured, financing is available, you have abundant resources, you have a drive towards renewable energy, you have supportive off-takers, supportive government players. I think the regulation compared to the rest of the world relatively clear, and you have a good pipeline of opportunity. So I mean, anyone who's interested in renewable energy has a focus on this region. I mean, there's so much work to be done over the next 10 years. And yeah, I'm sure Sarah would agree, there's far too many people in the market already. I'd be quite happy if there were less investors, frankly.
Well, that sort of throws a bit of a wrinkle into the next question I was going to ask, because I think, look, with all of you here on stage, and certainly for a number of people in the audience, we do have local expertise in the region. But as we get to the end of the session, especially for our audience in London and globally, I was wondering if each of you could take a couple of minutes and talk about, what are the sort of key themes or opportunities or challenges that you would share with somebody who's perhaps new to the region or not in the region, and also just getting into the space, that you think are just absolutely critical for people to understand before they increase their risk capital to what's going on here. Claude, do you want to lead us
Yeah,
on?
I mean, the theme I would end on would be that we in the industry are at an extremely exciting time, where we are seeing the energy industry completely transform before our eyes. I mean, in 20 years' time, people will look back and say, right now, around this time was when solar power became absolutely mainstream, green hydrogen started what became a global phenomenon, and the move towards localization of energy within regions and smart grids and the ability to transfer power between between different states became the norm. And it seems a kind of a trite thing to say that this is a tipping point, if you like, in the change of the energy industry, but it really is. And particularly when you factor in green hydrogen, because green hydrogen will be an enormous global industry, and it's starting here. And a lot of the change that you've seen in the energy industry is in this region. Most of the governments in this area have deliberately decided to change their focus, to focus on green hydrogen and focus on renewable energy. So I think if you look at the global energy picture, we are at an extremely exciting time where we will all get to be part of a transformation of the industry. And this part of the world is really driving a lot of that activity. So I think it's a very exciting time, and this is the region where the magic is happening.
That's great. Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, maybe we'll touch upon two challenges I see here in the region specifically, and one is about the water stress. It will come as no surprise that the GCC is part of the top 10 most water stress countries or regions in the world. So we see low rainfall, of course, increasing temperatures, depletion of groundwater reserves. And so as a result, water desalination infrastructures have been developed over the past 2 decades, and there were some question marks as to the, of course, the environmental impact of these assets. Now, I think we've made a big step forward when adopting the RO, reverse osmosis type of technology, which is much more efficient when it comes to the power consumption. It also has an almost minimal impact on increasing seawater temperature. And one thing that also pleads in favor of RO is, of course, the ability to source green power. So, for example, the 2 deals we closed last year in Saudi, we managed to put some solar panels onto the side. And so, yeah, I think we've done a good step forward with the introduction of RO, and it will only continue. We've seen the decoupling of power and water production over the past couple of years, and this trend is set to continue now that the reverse osmosis has become a very economical technology, let's say. And I think there's also the regulatory framework in place to make sure that we have the right safeguards to protect the environment. But there are still some challenges in terms of use of chemicals, for example, brine management. So I see this as opportunities for us, and we're looking at the technological progress, but clearly that's the challenge. Another challenge that I see is with respect to thermal. So we know that today the region is very much still dependent on the hydrocarbon revenues. It's more than 50%. And even though we're talking a lot about renewable and hydrogen, the truth is today we're still very reliant on gas. At ENGIE, we believe that gas has a critical role to play in the future in a world where renewable are creating a lot of intermittency in the system in particular. So we believe that gas will still be there for the long term. But the truth is that every new gas assets that you build today will basically bring you beyond your decarbonization target. Most of the players have set net zero targets around 2050. At ENGIE, we have an objective to be net zero by 2045. So any new asset built from now on will impact that trajectory. So for us, the challenge when we look at new gas projects is to see to what extent at some point we'll be able to move these assets into more decarbonized schemes. So we're looking at ways to, in the future, potentially decarbonize these assets. And I think it's also a focus point of the financing community. I mean, the banks are clearly now raising this point about gas. So there's still a lot of liquidity, but I think it will have to come with decarbonization solutions.
Super helpful and fascinating. Thank you. Mohammed, any final words of wisdom for our audience?
Not about the wisdom, but a few final words. I think the sustainability story, no matter what the asset, whether it's an airport or a hospital a desalination plant. The sustainability story is really at the heart of it. And taking a step back, when we have visitors coming from other offices, one story that comes is just the sheer power and water footprint in the GCC. The consumption of power and water are just not sustainable, and in the long term. And yes, it's a very pleasant lifestyle, but when extrapolated, given the resources impact, I think is something that does require a hard look at tariffs. It does require a hard look at the level of subsidy, and just a proper conversation about efficiency in everything that people do. So that's just one aspect. The other aspect is jobs, and that ties into the localization of the supply chain. Is really the focus on diversification has to go hand in glove with the huge youth bulge that's coming in the GCC. You have for a long time the ability to rely on governments that could take care of generations to come, but increasingly in the next 20, 30 years, this is going to be a challenge. Maybe less so in the UAE compared to Saudi or in Oman because of the mix of expat versus local. But I think it's a very important challenge that has to be at the core of any of the strategies that are looked at, and also goes to sustainability of these investments and diversification strategies.
Of course, thank you. Ali, any final words to wrap up?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm a couple of challenges that I'd like to highlight, other than obviously what my fellow panelists have already touched upon. I think we do really are getting to a point of, where we have kind of a problem of plenty. I mean, the plans that we have in the region are, they are incredible. I mean, there is so much happening, and there's so many projects in the pipeline. I think the problem that at least what we're seeing is that the pipeline is so massive that it is coming to a point of, which ones do you prioritize? There are new projects, there are diversification plans, there is sustainability aspect to it, there are renewable projects, massive renewable projects, there's entertainment. As Mohammed said, there is monetization of existing projects, which is going on. There's refinancing of previous projects, and there's conversion of older, less efficient energy projects into more efficient projects and more efficient water projects. So all of this is happening at the same time. And, it is a bit of a challenge for everyone to allocate resources. I mean, liquidity is one aspect. That does not automatically mean there is enough human capital available immediately to look at everything at the same time. So that is, I think, one of the challenges which is there, and which we're also facing internally, because there's tons of stuff happening, and you need to kind of evaluate at all times as to whether you need to increase your capacity, how long is it going to last, etc. The other thing, obviously, which everybody is talking about, and while we have a lot of liquidity available here, the base rates are rising, the interest rates are rising, and as the inflation rises, obviously the central banks across the world would increase interest rates, and that will make infrastructure more expensive. And that is, I think, a challenge which we will have to face here as well, because we're obviously connected to the global monetary system. And it remains to be seen how do the long-term interest rates curves actually behave over the next year or so. But yeah, I mean, that is one of the challenges that I foresee. And then on the opportunity side, I think we all think and talk about what we need to do. I think the key word is partnerships. Everybody needs to build partnerships. Governments need to build partnership with the developers. Developers need to build partnership with the banks who've been there, who they can trust, and who know how to deliver on these projects. So these partnerships will be key for the success of infrastructure going forward.
Thank you for that. And thank all of you. Clive, Sarah, Mohammed, Ali, these have been really valuable insights. And I know for those in the region and in the audience and those globally, this is hopefully a good reminder of how important this initiative is, not only for the region, but globally. The topic of interest rates is obviously front and center for all of us, and for those who are sticking around for the rest of the day, we do have a session on investing in emerging markets during these volatile times, so stick around for that. That's just after lunch. And the next panel will be on the digital transition, so a little bit of a shift in the diversification strategies for the region. So again, thank you to my panelists and friends here. Thanks to all of you for your attention, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks very much.
Thank you.